All right, this is Jeff Zimmerman from FightNews.com. I'm with the legendary boxing manager, promoter, all things boxing, Jackie Kallen. How are you, Jackie?
I'm wonderful, Jeff. Happy to be here with you and talk boxing.
Yeah, I've met you a few times over the years. You were out here in Dallas maybe a couple years ago. You had Tommy with you, Hearns. You had a fighter on the card. It was a great event. And how are things going these days?
Things are going wonderful. It's funny you mentioned Tommy Hearns because Tommy's my 43-year buddy. We've been friends since 78. And so we hang around a lot together. And just the other day, we had dinner together with a group of friends, and he's doing really well. Going to be 63 this year and fit and looking good. And the fighter that I had on that card in Dallas was Mike Quan Williams, and he's a 140-pounder that I manage, and he's doing great. You know, he's 17-0-1, and we're waiting. Hopefully by the end of the year, he'll have another fight. He fought earlier this year on Showtime and did great. So everything is moving along. I have a kid making a pro debut September 10th here in Detroit, Sam Rizzo, 130-pounder. So just keeping the ball rolling.
No slowing down for you.
Oh gosh, no. I feel like I'm more active now than I was 30, 40 years ago in terms of my energy level and the different projects that I'm involved in. And I'm just loving it all. I'll tell you, Jeff, life is good.
That's awesome. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Tommy. And obviously, there was a big documentary on recently, The Kings, starring Tommy, Sugar Ray Leonard, Duran, and the late, great, marvelous Marvin Hagler. And you actually played a pretty big role in that as well. And we're going to get to that here in a minute. But, I like talking to people like yourself because I don't want to use the word lifer, but you're a boxing lifer. I've worked with Richard Steele for 20 years. I put him in that category. You got Bob Arum, Don King, the kind of, the old school folks that are still out there. But a lot of people may not know your background, your history. So talk about, I know you used to be a showbiz journalist, covered the Rolling Stones, Elvis, Frank Sinatra, you name it. Talk about how you got into the sweet science, boxing.
Well, it was an accident, basically. I don't think I ever had aspirations to be a boxing manager or promoter. I was an entertainment writer. I wanted to be the next Barbara Walters. I wanted to interview every big star, every big athlete, politicians, musicians, any celebrity that came along, that came through town on a press tour or was appearing here or playing here, whatever. And I did that for 25 years. And believe me, it was amazing. I went to the Oscars, the Emmys, the Tonys, the Grammys, and I really met everybody I ever wanted to meet, and some of whom I got to become friendly with and spend time with. And, I treasure all those memories. But in the mid 70s, the paper I was at was short of a sports writer. For whatever reason, they needed somebody to cover a story on a young pitcher that was playing for the Detroit Tigers named Mark Fidrich. And
the bird,
right.
Yeah.
And it's surprising at your age, you would know that. I'm impressed. But they sent me to do the interview because he wasn't really doing interviews. And they felt that a young female might be able to get more out of him. So he was very gracious. I got the interview, and they kept me on as a sports writer as well as an entertainment writer. And one of the assignments that I got was to interview a young boxer out of Detroit who was Thomas Hearns, a 4-round fighter who was starting to make a name for himself. And they sent me to do the interview. And that opened the door to the rest of my life, so to speak, because I really fell in love with the sport. I don't know why. Maybe I equated boxing to life. There's always a fight. You can get knocked down, but you got to get back up. And whatever it was, I just was drawn to the sport. And I interviewed Tommy and just thought he was the sweetest, nicest guy out of the ring. But in the ring, he was like this killer. I mean, his stare would scare you out of your pants. I mean, he was mean. But then out of the ring, he was so soft-spoken. And so I was kind of captivated by that dichotomy of these two different people that lived within this one skinny little body. So that got me involved in boxing, the psychology of a fighter, what makes a fighter. And then, of course, I went on to interview Emanuel Steward and all the other fighters that he had at the time. And then he hired me as the publicist for the Kronk Gym. And so for the next 10 years, that's what I did. I did press kits, press conferences, weigh-ins, and really worked carefully with all the champions that came out of the Kronk Gym in Detroit. And there were so many of them. And it was just a champion machine back in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
And it was a great education for me. I learned how to wrap hands, how to stop cuts, how to pick sparring partners, and, you know, all the basics of the boxing business. And I wouldn't have traded that experience for anything. Emanuel Steward was just an amazing mentor.
So we gotta dive a little bit deeper, because you reached the pinnacle, it sounds like, of your career when you're interviewing all these celebrities, musicians, artists, going to the biggest events in entertainment. Mm-hmm. Did people think you were a little bit crazy to put that all on the side and get into boxing, or what was it like back then?
Well, first of all, I didn't put it to the side. I was crazy enough to think I could do both. So I kept my job as a newspaper writer. I also got a job on TV on a show called PM Magazine, which was very big in the 80s on CBS. And I had a radio show on Saturdays. So, and I was raising two kids. So I really didn't slow down. I kind of just added boxing at that time to the mix. And it really wasn't until the late 90s that I was so submerged in boxing, owning my own gym, having all these champions, that I really didn't have the time to give to boxing, to writing as I did to boxing. So it just kind of fell to the wayside. I miss it, but you can't do everything.
Right.
But to the second part of your question, did people think I was crazy? That's a resounding, emphatic yes, especially the girls that I ran around with, you know, in my group of friends, suburbia, going down into the inner city gyms with the noise and the smell and the sweat and all of that. It was nobody's idea of a fun day. You know, tennis lessons, maybe. Play cards with the girls, maybe. Out to lunch, go to the mall, for sure. But boxing?
So it's
a great choice.
Right. And you, like you said, you kind of fell in love with Tommy right off the top, you know, this dichotomy of in the ring, out of the ring. But again, you were at the top of, you know, the entertainment world. What was that transition like, you know, where just in talking to the different people, one day talking to Frank Sinatra, and then next time talking to a 4-round fighter who may never do anything?
Well, you know, it was kind of fun because I would take the fighters to the concerts with me. So I would be going to, let's say, review and interview Elton John. So I would take Tommy with me. Or Elton John would want to go to a Tiger game after his show the next night. So I'd get him tickets. Or I would take the fighters to see Kiss or to see Andrew Dice Clay or whoever I was dealing with on that side. If they liked boxing, I'd invite them to the gym, or I'd bring a fighter to their concert. So I started blending the two, and it was surprising to me how many celebrities love boxing. So I kind of mixed them as much as I could, and it just gave me more fun and more people to talk to. And like I said, Tommy would bring, you know, a Kronk jacket to someone, and they would give a tour jacket to that person. And, you know, it was just a lot of fun mixing the two worlds.
And you see that today more and more, right? With other sports, or, you know, celebrities going to see Pacquiao at Wild Card. So it's almost like you were at the forefront of all that.
Well, you know, I'm sure it was the same way when Ali was champ, when Joe Louis was champ. I think that celebrities are drawn to boxing. I think it's always been that way. And I just had the opportunity of being involved in both, so I could kind of blend them. And that made it so much fun for me because I could take, when I'm in LA, I lived there for 16 years, so I could take my celebrity friends to the gym. And then, like I said, bring the fighters to their shows. And, you know, it was kind of the best of both worlds for me. And I think both sides enjoyed meeting the other side.
And you grew up in Detroit, and you mentioned suburbia. I'm from LA, the suburbia part of it in the San Fernando Valley. Were you a boxing fan as a kid? Did your dad watch boxing? Grandparents? Did you have any ties to it at all?
Not really. It was just, I was aware of it. I became aware of it with Ali because he was just the biggest thing going, and everyone I knew just was Ali fans. And so that kind of piqued my interest in it. Then I saw the movie The Main Event with Barbara Streisand and Ryan O'Neal, and I thought that was fabulous, loved it. Then 1976, I saw Rocky for the first time. That's what got me loving the whole idea of boxing. I'd never been to a fight, but if Rocky Balboa was what boxing was about, I just thought it was amazing. So when I had the opportunity to interview a boxer and go to a live fight, I was so excited. I kept thinking I was going to see Rocky there, or someone like him. And it took a few years till I actually met the real Sylvester Stallone and got to know him, and later on work with him on The Contender and that. But that was my idea of what boxing was, and it became even more interesting as I got involved in it. But the Rocky movies were to me fabulous for boxing, and what they did to bring so many fans into the sport.
Did you ever think, like, obviously being a woman in boxing was very rare back then. Obviously today it's a lot more profound. You see a lot more women in the sport, which is great. But like back then you had like Eileen Eaton running the Olympic Auditorium. You talk about the celebrities, from the Burt Reynolds, the Ryan O'Neals, and the people that would show up there. I mean, did you even have that go through your mind back then, or you're just there doing a job and you just loved it?
I was just doing what I loved doing. And I heard about Eileen Eaton, of course, early on when I got into boxing, because that was the only female that anyone really knew that had done anything, except maybe Becky, this lady that worked the corner for Jeff Chandler, this little old lady, Becky, and she was adorable. But other than that, I didn't know any other women had ever been involved. And that's why it meant so much to me later on when I received the Eileen Eaton Award. And that meant so much to me because it meant that torch was passed on. And, to me, that was the greatest honor to know that, in winning the Boxing Writers Award as Manager of the Year in '92. That was a great honor, and being in, the World Boxing Hall of Fame. I haven't made it to the Canastota one yet, but hopefully when they induct James Toney, they'll kind of put me in there with him because we were a team. But the accolades you get are the rewards you get for doing a good job. And I think early on, the worst part was being called a good manager for a woman. Like, oh, she does a good job for a woman. And it took a long time till people got past that and would give me the credit of saying she does a good job, period. Not necessarily because I'm a woman or in spite of being a woman, but just across the board. And that means a lot because you don't want to be labeled by your gender or your age or your ethnicity or anything like that. You just want to be judged for who you are and what you do.
Did you feel like you had to put on a certain persona when, in boxing because you were a woman, like you had to have like a certain toughness, or how did you handle that going into a room and negotiating and with among all men pretty much?
Well, my motto is always just be who you are. It's the only person you can be is yourself. It's the only person you know how to be. And so I never dumbed down or dressed down. I would go to the gym in high heels with, hair, makeup, nails, just the way you see me now is how I always present myself, because that's just the way I'm wired. I'm a girly girl. So I didn't try to change that and take off the makeup and wear, sneakers and sweats or anything. I stayed true to who I am. And I think that helped me in a way rather than hurt me because I was authentic. I think I was who I am, and that's that. But the toughness came out when I had to bring it out. And that's just my inner core. I'm very soft on the outside. I'm an easygoing person. I have very little temper, very little mood swings. What you see is kind of what you get. But when I have to be tough, somehow I just dig deep and bring it out when I have to. But again, I'm not a tough person by nature. I'm not down and dirty and I'll do what I have to get to the top. That's never been my style or my persona, frankly. So I've just been lucky in situations where I've been dealing with nice people. And I've really never had a horribly bad experience. And this is my 44th year in boxing. And I've never been sued. I've never been to arbitration. I've just had, I'd say, good luck and pick the right people to work with.
You know, it's funny you say that because I tell people all the time, there's so many great people in boxing, but the headlines that you read, you wouldn't always know that, but there's so many great people that are doing so many great things for people in and outside of the ring. So that's great. You mentioned James Toney. Obviously, you guys were a team. You led him to his first world title, I believe, in 1991. One of the, I mean, again, I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, you know, in the 70s and 80s. You know, Toney was one of the best, slickest boxers I have ever seen. I was a Sugar Ray guy growing up, but, you know, the next generation. Talk about the relationship with Toney and how that all came about. Obviously, you had the Kronk Gym experience, working with Manny Steward, Thomas Hearns as a publicist, but then to foray into boxing and get a guy as talented as James, what was that like?
Well, in 1988, I'd been working with Emanuel for 10 years by then. And I really had no aspirations to manage. I was really happy doing PR and doing all the things I did. And then a young fighter from Chicago, Bobby Hitz, came to town to fight George Foreman during Foreman's comeback, and he had no manager. So I liked the kid. I thought he had a great personality. He was a lot of fun. So one thing led to another, and I asked if he needed a manager, and he started working with me, and he moved to Detroit, and they didn't want him at Kronk because he didn't fit into what they were looking for at the time. So I took him to another gym, and while we were there, we saw James training. His manager had just been shot and killed, and he had no manager. Emanuel wasn't interested in James at that time. So I was lucky enough to be able to make a deal and get him into my stable. So now I had two fighters. And then I signed Kenny Gould right out of the 88 Olympics in 89. And now I had three fighters. So my little stable started growing. So I started my own gym. And by 91, I had my first champion with James. And then Bronco McCart and Boom Boom Johnson and the other kids came after that. And then James went on to beat Iran Barkley and get the super middleweight championship. And we had 6 years of some really great adventures and a lot of wonderful fights and good memories. And, you know, I've had the pleasure of managing so many good kids, so many nice fighters, you know, Tarek Salmasian, Bernard Harris, and Michael Dallas, and Damian Fuller, and Pinklin Thomas. And I can go on and on. There's been so many great, wonderful guys that gave me the opportunity to manage them. And I'm happy to say Lonnie Beasley's one of them. And we all stay in touch. That's the nice thing. I've kept great friendships with all these fighters, and, you know, my birthday, Mother's Day, the holidays, I hear from all of them. And I can say I've really had wonderful success with the guys I've picked. They've all been gentlemen and just really great human beings.
What made James so special? I mean, obviously he's a Hall of Famer, soon to be. I thought he should have been in on this last go around.
Right?
Didn't make sense to me, but what made him so special?
There's a lot of things that make James Toney special, but to me, you know, as someone who gave him a start and managed him, I would say his defense was just impenetrable. I mean, the way he would roll, you know, that shoulder and the way he'd pick off those shots, you know, it was so hard to hit him. And his attitude, I mean, he did not want to lose. Losing was not an option. We used to put that on some of his shirts and things. He just was one of those guys that went in there. He didn't care who he fought. He just went in there to win, and he did what he had to do to win. And you don't see that all the time with a fighter. Usually, at least in my experience, they want to know who they're fighting, who did that person fight, what did that guy eat for breakfast, how many amateur fights did he have, how tall is he, how short is he southpaw, is he right? James never cared. Just line him up and he would just knock him down. He was just that kind of a guy. And that attitude goes a long way. You know, you can be very skilled and have great discipline, but if you don't have that do or die attitude, you're not going to be a champion. And James definitely has that kind of an attitude. And
how is your relationship today with him?
Good, good. Last time I was in LA, the time before that, before the pandemic, I was staying not too far away from him, and he came over with his wife and we visited. Time before that, we all went out to lunch, and we have he's like part of my family, basically. You know, he's same age as my sons, and you know, we all went on trips together when I was managing him, and he just is a special place in my heart. James Toney is just very special to me.
Well, I hope you and him do go in together, because it just makes sense. But time will tell. We got to talk about the Kings, which to me was one of the best boxing documentaries I've ever seen. You know,
Wasn't it great?
Yeah, it was great. It was great seeing all those highlights and, you know, and fights and the behind the scenes, and someone that comes from growing up in that era. I just thought it was amazing. And you obviously, as I mentioned before, played a big part, you know, telling the Kronk story, but especially about Tommy Hearns. Talk about that experience and all those big fights, you know, with Tommy and all the other guys.
Well, you know, obviously with your background, you know that there were 9 fights altogether between all of them, and I was at most of them. And some of them I was in the audience. As a matter of fact, one of the pictures of Tommy and Sinatra and I was taken at, I think, Leonard Hagler at that fight. And another picture I have was Stallone and his brother Frank was taken at maybe Duran, Leonard, or but great memories, all of them. Not so much Hearns Hagler wasn't a great memory. However, it is probably one of the best 3 rounds in boxing history, and it's gone down, you know, in the records as being the best 3 rounds. So it's fun to be part of that. And, you know, the first Leonard fight, if had possibly then been a 12-round fight, I think Tommy would have won it, but it was 15 rounds back then. Second fight, he clearly won, but they called it a draw. We see how that happens. Sometimes a fight will be very much one way, and for political reasons, it's, you know, a draw. But nevertheless, that era, Jeff, it was magical. I mean, every fight we got dressed up like we were going to the Oscars. I mean, the best outfits you could buy. The guys were so sharp. We just dressed for every fight. And you saw all the celebrities there, and all the high rollers were in the casino. I mean, you would walk through the casino and you'd see these guys with thousands of dollars on the table, and the sports book was just packed with people betting on the fights, and the excitement in the air was so palpable. I mean, fight week was like no other event. Maybe Super Bowls like that, but I've been to Super Bowl and it wasn't quite the same as these 2 people. You know, you'd pull up to Caesars and there'd be these enormous posters of the 2 fighters, and it was just an exciting era. And I haven't seen it since. I hope we have it again, but it was just the whole concept of these 4 guys. Each one is the best and fighting the best. And that's the excitement of boxing, is when the best fights the best.
Right, right. And so even while you're living it, you still felt it was like a special time. You can just, the fights were so big that you felt it.
Oh, for sure. It was just an incredible era, but much more so now looking back. You know, when you're living through something, you never see it the same way you see it in retrospect. You know what they say about, you know, hindsight being 20/20 and all that.
Mm-hmm.
You look back at something and you go, wow, that was really something. But as a time, you know, while you're living it at that time, you're just doing it. But when I look back, the 80s were incredible.
Yeah, let me ask you, because one of the stories that came out of the documentary, I wasn't familiar with, about Tommy's brother murdering his girlfriend and going to jail. What is he still in prison, or what?
No, it's kind of a sad story because Henry's the nicest kid ever. I don't really know the circumstances that surrounded that event, but it did happen, and he did end up shooting his girlfriend with Tommy's gun in Tommy's house, and he served his time. He got out, which, you know, the family was thrilled to have him back, and then he got shot, and he's in a wheelchair now.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of a sad story, but he has a beautiful little girl and he has a good life, and we're all happy that he's okay. And it was just one of those tragedies that happened, and it was tough because it was right before a big fight. We tried to, as much as we could, keep it from Tommy so it wouldn't affect him, but you can't really keep something like that from someone when it's all over the news. But, you know, we had to kind of get everything cleaned up and fixed before he got home so he wouldn't have to go home to that. It was a bad time, but, you know, bad things happen.
Yeah. And which fight was that? Did it happen before? I don't recall.
It was the second, I think it was the second Leonard fight.
Leonard.
That's what I'm thinking, yeah. I'm trying to think about that time. It wasn't a happy memory.
Right. No, I appreciate you sharing kind of what happened after, because I didn't see anything. So, and we'll wrap up here soon, Jackie. I'm with, again, the legendary boxing manager, promoter, who's done it all in the sport, Jackie Kallen for fightnews.com, and really appreciate the time.
I'm enjoying this. This is fun. So,
yeah, I can't wait to see you live and being able to talk even more. So hopefully soon. You became so big in the sport that a movie was made on your life, Against the Ropes, starring Meg Ryan, who was a superstar actress. What was that like? You even played a small part in there as a reporter, I believe. Talk about
one line.
Yeah, what was that experience like?
You know, it was very surreal to see somebody else being called by your name and portraying you. And it's not painful, but it's uncomfortable because it's not really you, and you wouldn't really dress that way or say it that way or do it that way. But I think the honor of being considered worthy of a movie being inspired by your life is an honor that I'll always have. It's a legacy for my kids and grandkids. I didn't think the movie was very true to my story, but that's Hollywood. You know, they kind of tweak it and change it, and before you know, it's like, who is that? And what happened was it was supposed to be based on the life of, and then it got so far away that I made them change it to inspired by, because it really wasn't based on my life anymore. But like I say, it's such an honor to be recognized in your field enough to have a movie made, that I think that will always mean a lot to me, because it validated my career and the fact that I was doing a good job at what I love doing.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I know you mentioned the main event, and I've met Ryan O'Neal. Obviously, I don't know if you know, but Richard Steele played a part in that movie. But Ryan, you know, I know his history a little bit, having managed Hedgeman Lewis, and he was an amateur boxer.
He's a friend of mine, and I got to thank him because he did an exhibition bout for me a few years back. I think it was for American Cancer Foundation, and he fought Jimmy Lang, who's one of the guys that was on the Contender with me. And Ryan's just a stand-up guy. He's just a good friend and a nice guy.
Well, I hope to see him later this year, his West Coast Boxing Hall of Fame. Maybe if you're in town, he usually goes every year. Rick Ferris puts it on, and yes. Richard's going in, De La Hoya, and a bunch of others. So
when is it? Do you know?
I believe it's in October. I'll send you the date.
I'll definitely go, because those are all my buddies, and I love to go to all the Hall of Fame things. And I'm in the California Hall of Fame. I should go.
Yeah, I'll let you know. Rick Ferris, who's worked in the movie business, good friends with Ryan, he puts it on. I've never been to it, but I'm going this year.
You'll love it.
Yeah, and obviously Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame, where we've seen each other. I think they're going to postpone again till next year, just with COVID and everything. So hopefully they get that back on track. But the other part of you, Jackie, just, I follow other people in boxing, other women in boxing, and you're a mentor for not just men, but a lot of female people in boxing, like Raging Babe, and I know several others. What is that feeling like to give back?
Well, all the girls, Shelley Williams and Rachel Charles and Serafina and Claire Burke, all my girls, I love the fact that they can come to me and talk to me about boxing and what they're experiencing, because I didn't have that. There was no woman I could go to. So for me to be able to be here for these young girls that want to go into it, it's an honor for me. And I mean, women need to help other women, and so many women are competitive, so they want to hold other women back so that they can be the queen, so to speak. I don't feel that way at all. I want to bring them all up behind me and form this little sorority or union of women in boxing, and I think it's great. I encourage all of them to follow their dream, and I'm here for all of them, whatever their questions or needs, or just when they need to vent, I'm just happy to be here for them.
And what advice would you give, male or female? Because you mentioned when you got started in the sport, putting press kits together, you're probably using your experience as a journalist, doing whatever it takes. I know when I got started, it's not a company where you go and interview for boxing. You just kind of fall into it, right? You just kind of find your way. What advice would you give someone who loves boxing and wants to be a part of it?
Oh, just study the sport like I did. I did not try to jump in and know it all. I mean, I studied it and I learned every aspect of the old fighters. I learned styles because styles make a fight. I learned how to score a fight accurately. I learned, like I told you earlier, how to stop a cut, how to wrap hands. You have to learn whatever your craft is. You have to study it. You have to learn it. You have to be prepared. And knowledge is power. And when you know something, you can speak about it intelligently. You can make the right decisions because you have that knowledge. So I encourage anybody, if you're going to go into boxing, learn the sport, all different angles of the sport. I do a show, a podcast on Exposure Network TV called Out of the Ring. And I talk to fighters, promoters, managers, cutmen, anyone connected to the sport. And I tell people, just absorb it all. Listen to anyone connected to boxing and listen to their stories, learn from them, and then take that knowledge and go on out and do what you want, whether it's managing, promoting a fight, becoming a boxing writer. Just go for it. Follow your dream, but know what you're doing. That's the main thing. Know what you're doing.
And we mentioned Emanuel Steward earlier, but how big of an impact was he on your boxing career?
Huge. If he didn't give me the opportunity to go work for him in the Kronk Gym, I would never be where I am today, because I don't know any other men in the sport in the late 70s that would have welcomed a female in. Really and truly, it was even handing out press kits at the big fights. There were always the boxing writers and the old guys back then that would like, who are you? And, are you someone's girlfriend or what are you doing here? It was always, what is she doing here? I was always the only female in these all male situations and environments. And I didn't look, here's this blonde all dressed and everything. And it just, I wasn't like a fit into that world. And Emanuel always said, just hold your head up high and just do your job. And eventually they'll give you your respect. And that's what I did. I just kept my nose clean, did my job. I didn't listen to, the lewd comments or the innuendos. I just kept my nose forward and my eye on the prize and just smiled a lot, And maybe I came off as a little much of a bimbo at the beginning to them because I didn't really say that much. I did my job and smiled a lot.
Mhm.
And then as I got to know more, I could speak more intelligently about the sport. And then I think people started to take me more seriously and didn't think I was a front or someone's girlfriend or a gimmick. Like, oh, I think I'll get this blonde to hand out the press kits and that'll get more attention to my fighters or whatever. And I was never, in my mind, a gimmick. And if he was using me that way, it worked. So I don't really think it was a problem. And he was just great. He was just one of the finest men. Watching him train was such an honor. I mean, he knew what he was doing. He was just so talented and he was fun. He's just a really fun guy.
So basically, without Manny Steward, Emanuel Steward, there may not be a Jackie Kallen in boxing, it sounds like.
Probably not.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. And what was the one thing he saw in you, do you think? Obviously, he took a chance bringing you, bringing you into his world, but what did he see in you?
I think he saw my immediate fascination with the sport. I think he saw, wow, this girl really cares about boxing. She really likes this. And then I think he saw my business side, that I could write, which was important to doing press kits, that I had good organizational skills, which maybe he didn't. And so I could organize a press conference. I could set up the weigh-in and all that stuff. I did the parties the night before the fight. And I was sort of like the social, I don't know what you'd call it because there was no such position, but I was a little social director of everything. And I think he saw an enthusiastic person who loved the sport, who was smart enough to maybe do the things that he didn't have time to do. And I think we kind of complemented each other because he could do his work in the gym and not have to worry about the press conferences and the weigh-ins. And when the media wanted a press kit on Dwan Johnson or Hilmer Kenty or Mickey Goodwin or one of the fighters, I could take care of that. So it just kind of worked. And I think we had respect for each other. And it's just one of those stories where it seems unlikely, but it worked.
That's so great. That's so great. And I mentioned Richard Steele, in the similar sense, gave me an opportunity kind of based on the same things, that I heard from you with Emanuel Steward. And I know Richard and Emanuel Steward went way back from the Golden Gloves and, there was a lot of history between them in talking to Richard, but that's so awesome. And before we wrap up, Jackie, you have a lot of projects going on. You mentioned your podcast. I want to give you an opportunity to just talk about everything you're doing. You're managing fighters. You're hosting a podcast. Every time I look around, you and Tommy are at some big gala or event. You're, like you said, you're living the life. What else is going on?
Well, Tommy and I are like brother and sister after all these years. And we've gone through divorces together and birthdays together and family events together and deaths of people in our family. And, we're like family. So I spent a lot of time with him and him with me and my boyfriend and him and whoever he's with and our whole group of friends. And I do motivational speaking, which is what I really, really love. And so when I get a chance, and I haven't been able to because of the pandemic, I start back up this fall. Hopefully. Right. I love going around and talking to groups, just about making it in a man's world, about self-motivation, about female empowerment, about health issues, because believe it or not, I am healthy as I can be when you look at me, but I have 4 heart stents. I have glaucoma. I have sleep apnea. Right now, I'm dealing with melanoma. I'm having it removed in another week or so. But those things don't really define a person's life. Those are just little issues, bumps in the road. But, I have that to deal with. And so my motivational speaking gives me a chance to get out there and talk to people and meet people. I have 2 books out. I'm working on a 3rd book. And I talk a lot about aging, and how to age a certain way, because I am 75, so I'm not exactly, a baby.
And we'll never know it. You look fantastic.
Thank you for that. But yeah, I like to talk to people about how aging is just an attitude, because actually I have more energy now than I probably had 10 years ago, and I'm doing more things. And, just life in general and attitude and how everything is what you make of it. And, you know, I'm a blessed person. I have so much gratitude. And like they say, gratitude defines your attitude. So I'm just lucky all the way around. And then again, I get to talk to you tonight, and that's great. And so this has been a lot of fun. I really have had a great time.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's been an honor to talk to you and do this interview. We'll end it here with this question. When you ever decide to hang up the gloves, you mentioned the Hall of Fame with James Toney. That's probably if you had a bucket list, that's probably the last thing. And I know it will happen at some point, but what would your legacy be? What do you want your legacy to be in boxing?
Well, I think obviously the Hall of Fame is everybody's goal in our sport. But I think my legacy would be that here's a woman that kind of broke through the ceiling, did it in a classy, a kind way, never took advantage of a fighter, never cheated anybody, was never sued, never had a single problem, just kind of went through the sport for however many years it'll be by the time I do hang them up. Just someone that loved the sport, gave her all to the sport, and stayed in it until the very end.
Well, Jackie, on that note, thank you so much for this interview for fightnews.com. You're a treasure. You're one of the legends in the sport, one of the living legends. And I can't wait to share this with the rest of the world. And I wish you continued success and hope to see you either later this year or sometime next year.
I sure hope so, Jeff. And thank you so much for your time. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Jackie. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.